Equip spells are one of the base types of cards in the games, where there's rules in the rulebook to explain how they function, so you don't have to explain it in every single card, that you activate them by targeting something you control in order to equip them to. And they also have the rulings where they go to the graveyard if the thing they're attached to is no longer on the field or face up. And historically, equip cards have been one of the worst types of cards in the game, despite the fact that they're spell cards that can be activated immediately and generally fail at the main purpose that you think they might serve, i.e. boosting a monster's battle power or effectiveness in some way. There are two cards that really illustrate this point: Grid Rod and YuGiOh Power Jersey. Grid Rod is a card that can only be equipped to a Cyberse monster, where it gives that monster 300 attack, makes it so once per turn it cannot be destroyed by battle, and gives it full immunity to all of your opponent's card effects. Additionally, it has an effect where if it's destroyed and sent to the graveyard, the Cyberse monsters you control cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects until the end of the turn. Now, this equip card literally gives a monster the best form of protection you could possibly ask for: full immunity to all card effects. There are some cards that see competitive play purely because they have the ability to be immune to card effects, like Raid Raptor Ultimate Falcon or Psychic End Punisher, which has restrictions on how it gains its immunity. And Grid Rod just grants immunity to any Cyberse monster it's equipped to, while also giving it other benefits like a small attack boost and protection against the biggest threat to immune monsters, i.e. being destroyed by battle, as it protects them from one such destruction per turn. And there's no downsides in the card either, and you don't have to pay maintenance costs. It doesn't negate the effects of the monster it's equipped to, it just straight up gives the monster the best kind of protection in the game. And this may not surprise anyone who's played Yu-Gi-Oh to hear this, but this card sees absolutely no competitive play and isn't even considered a halfway decent card. We also have another banger like YuGiOh Power Jersey. It can only be equipped to a YuGiOh monster and grants an additional 1000 attack and defense, which is a premium stat line to be granted from an equipped spell card, as old school staples like Axe of Despair had that sole effect of granting that kind of attack point value. It also doubles all battle damage your opponent takes, and if the monster is equipped to destroys a monster by battle, it can make a second attack during the battle phase. So, if you equip it to a monster like YuGiOh Mighty Slugger, which makes it so your opponent can't activate any cards or effects when it attacks, and then you boost its attack even further with just YuGiOh Playmaker, you can very easily attack over any of your opponent's monsters, then attack directly for 8200 points of damage. YuGiOh Power Jersey is an absolutely broken and overpowered buff style equip spell that allows you to push for a massive amount of damage in an archetype that's all about battling and boosting up your cards in the battle phase in order to do things. And even has its own built-in negate to allow their effects to go through in the form of YuGiOh Perfect Ace. And just like Grid Rod, it shouldn't surprise any longtime Yu-Gi-Oh players to hear that this card sees absolutely no competitive play, and isn't even considered a good card within its archetype. There are 4 cards in the game that allow you to generically search out any equip spell from your deck. Hidden Armory, which allows you to search any equip spell by sending the top card of your deck to the graveyard and giving up your normal summon. Armory Call, which allows you to search any equip spell from your deck and either add it to your hand or equip it to a monster on the field immediately. Gearbreed, which allows you to search any equip spell from your deck during your draw phase instead of doing your normal draw. And even Toolbox, which allows you to once per turn reveal 2 equip cards with different names from your deck and randomly add one of them to your hand, which is just a pure +1 in card advantage every turn. And there's even Violon Cube, which can search out any equip spell from your deck if it's used for the synchro summon of a light monster, which it has been used quite often in the past in order to search out key equip spells. And I can tell you for sure that there are no other base types of cards in the game that have this much generic searchable support. And none of these cards really see competitive play very often. If there was a card like Gearbreed for continuous spell cards, it would be absolutely broken. If there was a Toolbox for field spell cards, that would be broken. If there was an Armory Call to just search out trap cards in the same way it search out equip spells, that would also be really broken. And in fact, there is a card similar to this one with a whole bunch of restrictions called Trap Trick. So how can we have absolutely broken cards like Grid Rod and YuGiOh Power Jersey in the game, and yet not only does nobody use them, but nobody considers either of them a problem in the slightest? And how can we have so many cards that can generically search out any equip spell from your deck, which are also not seen as a problem in the slightest, as none of them are hit on the ban list in any way? That's because equip spells are so inherently flawed in their design that they need to do something ridiculously special in order to see any kind of competitive play. And the main purpose of buffing of a monster in some way is not special enough most of the time. You see, if we take a card like Grid Rod and try to explain why it doesn't see competitive play, we have to first kind of explain how modern Yu-Gi-Oh works. Usually, with modern Yu-Gi-Oh, you have 5 cards in your opening hand, and of those, you need some of them to be hand traps in order to not absolutely get blown out by your opponent. Or you need some of those to be going second staples, or equalizers, as some people like to call them, in order to help equalize your opponent's board so you can actually get your plays through. So your hand is already occupied by a couple of staple cards. For this example, we'll say it's at least 2 of them. Then your other 3 cards, you have your actual combo pieces. And if you're trying to build an unbreakable board of monsters, you kind of want all of those cards to be able to independently do something amazing. Or if you have an archetype that is very synergistic with each other and needs other cards within its archetypes to do its plays, like Virtual Worlds for example, then you can't really afford to play anything else. But if you're in a special position where you're playing an archetype that doesn't really need many cards from its archetypes in order to accomplish its combos, and you already have an amount of hand traps and going second cards you want, in that case you could play equipped spell buff cards that might just break your hand with unusable cards that could have been better spent on hand traps or more going second cards, or cards from your actual main combo. So unless your main combo specifically allows you to cheat out the use of spell cards, like Infernobles or Power Tool, then there's no real point in playing them when you could instead play more hand traps or just more cards from the archetype in order to get your plays actually going. Because a lot of strategies are stopped by your opponent's hand traps or equalizer cards. So you don't really have the luxury of playing cards that can buff your monsters when you're fighting so hard to just get them on the field in the first place. And then, once you do have your monsters in the field, and you're in a stable position because you're able to stop your opponent from building an unbreakable board of monsters, and you finally have gotten some kind of equipped spell card on your monster, like maybe you got a Mighty Slugger on the field and equipped with a Power Jersey, your opponent can just destroy the card by temporarily removing Mighty Slugger from the field with something like number 70 Malevolent Sin, or simply flipping it face down with something like Book of Moon, Flunderies at the Dreaming Town, or Ultimate Conductor Tyranno. You don't even have to destroy any of the monsters involved in these equipped cards, because they'll destroy themselves if you use pretty much any form of temporary removal on the monster, or simply flip it face down. And that's not even mention the fact that the card is also vulnerable in the spell and trap card zone to things like Twin Twisters, Lightning Storm, or Nightmare Phoenix. Equipped spells have a double weakness, the monster they're equipped to being removed in any way, even one that might not be a permanent removal of the monster from the field, and of course all spell and trap card removal. So because equipped spell cards stop working if you so much as breathe on them with any form of disruption, you can kind of print whatever effects you want on them and nobody will use them, like they kinda did with UA Power Jersey and Grid Rod. However, even with all of these inherent design flaws with equipped spell cards, there are currently 4 of them that are banned. And there are even some equipped spell cards that see competitive play too. So, what exactly is the difference between the very few that actually see play and the vast majority of them that never do? Well, it's pretty simple. The equipped spells that see play precisely because they use the fact that they're equipped spell cards as a downside to the card in order to have an immediate impact on the field. Cards like Snatch Steal just allow you to steal one of your opponent's monsters and is banned because it's a pure +1 in card advantage. And it being vulnerable to normal equipped spell card shenanigans is part of its downside. Cards like Falling Down and Comic Hand have similar effects, but are more balanced because they require you to have other card spaces on the field in order for them to work, in addition to them being equipped spell cards. Butterfly Dagger Alma is banned because it has the ability to infinitely come back to your hand if it's destroyed in the field, and has nothing to do with its effect to give a monster a 300 attack. Premature Burial is banned because it can special summon a monster from your graveyard on a non-once per turn effect, which is both easy to loop with self-bouncing cards like Zephyros, and is actually a bit strong with all the generic equipped spell searchers that I talked about earlier, although it's mainly banned because of the ability to be looped. In the same way the lesser powered version called DDR Different Dimension Reincarnation is actually used in a lot of combos, because it allows you to special summon a banished monster by discarding 1 card from your hand. Even though it's an actual -1 in card advantage to use, the fact that it can be looped because it's not a hard once per turn is why it's seen a whole bunch of play. And it doesn't actually have any benefits to the monster it's equipped to, as its equipped spell status is used as a downside for the powerful effect of special summoning a monster. Which is kind of funny that some of the best equipped spell cards in the game that see competitive play are only equipped spell cards because it's such a downside of being an equipped spell card. Speaking of cards that were designed around the detriment of being an equipped spell card, we have Smoke Grenade of the Thief. This card only has an effect if it's destroyed by a card effect while equipped to a monster, where it allows you to look at your opponent's hand and discard 1 card from it. This is a very powerful effect, but can only activate if it's destroyed by a card effect and not by its own procedure. So if the monster it's equipped to is removed from the field temporarily and it destroys itself, that will not proc its effect. I'm pretty sure you can see a pattern where a lot of the best equipped spell cards in the game only exist as equipped spell cards because it's such a huge downside to the card's strong effect. However, there are some cards that have seen play as equipped spell cards for the purpose of being equipped spell cards that buff a monster. We have Mage Power and United We Stand. Both of these cards saw play in early YuGiOh because they have such a huge attack boost to a monster for 1 card, back in a format where having big beat sticks was actually viable. Although YuGiOh quickly moved into a more combo-heavy format, and those 2 cards fell out of favor rather quickly. And it's almost surprising to hear that some of them actually appeared on the ban list in some way, shape, or form, because I don't see any competitive play nowadays. There is, however, one card that still sees competitive play every now and then that does have the benefit of buffing the monster it's equipped to, and that's the Moon Mirror Shield. This card, when equipped to a monster, makes it so that whenever it battles another monster, its attack and defense will always become 100 higher than whatever it's battling. And if this equipped card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can pay 500 points to either put it on the top or bottom of your deck. And unlike Smoke Grenade of the Thief, this effect can activate even if it's sent under its own procedure, i.e. the monster it's equipped to being breathed upon by any form of disruption. So Moon Mirror Shield allows you to attack over any monster essentially, and also allows you to protect a monster almost indefinitely from being destroyed by battle. It will also allow you to recur the card every turn at the cost of getting up your normal draw by itself. So Moon Mirror Shield is actually really good, and usually played alongside stun decks that are trying to stop your opponent from being able to do anything, in order to protect cards like Barrier Statues or Inspector Border. So it seems with Moon Mirror Shield, Konami has figured out the inherent problem with equipped spell cards that give buffs. They need to have some form of self-recursion in order to account for the downsides they incur. But they can't have too good of a recursion like Butterfly Dagger Elma did, otherwise they'll just be used for infinite loops. So when Konami designs archetypes built around equipped spell cards like the Noble Knights, they generally build all of the equipped spell cards with some kind of built-in recursion ability, to try and counteract just how inherently flawed the equipped spell cards are that are trying to be used as actual buffs. Although there is a modern archetype that uses equipped spell cards as their main gimmick and actually sees a ton of competitive play in all kinds of different decks. I think it's kind of ingenious how they're able to solve a lot of the problems inherent to equipped spell cards within its archetype. And that archetype, of course, is the Adventure Token engine. You see, the Adventure Token is a 2000 attack token, which upon being created by Right of Armasir, allows you to search out a card that searches out all of its equipped spell cards basically for free from your deck during each player's turn. And then the equipped spell cards themselves, like Dracoback the Rideable Dragon, have effects where if they're sent to the graveyard in any way, you can equip them from your graveyard to an adventure token you control once per turn. And the reason it's such a genius idea to have them equipped to a token is because tokens both cannot be flipped face down at all, and are thus immune to cards like Book of Moon, and also just straight up disappear if they're removed from the field temporarily, or just cannot be removed from the field temporarily in some ways, as tokens are immune to the effects of cards like Evenly Matched, since they cannot exist banished face down. And the last thing that makes all of this come together is the fact that tokens are generally created at a surplus in card advantage. You see, one of the big problems with equipped spell cards is that you get a 2-for-1 in card advantage if you're able to destroy a monster that has an equipped spell card on it. Where normally a fissure would be a 1-for-1 trade, it becomes a 2-for-1 trade if you're able to get an equipped spell card out of the exchange, usually netting whoever destroyed the monster with the equipped spell card a +1 in card advantage. So, if a token summoned at a +1 in card advantage instead, like the Adventure Token engine is, and it has a whole bunch of inherent protection for being a token, then when the token is finally removed from the field, you are still getting a 2-for-1 in most cases, but since it was brought into existence as a +1 in card advantage, it definitely evens out the detriments incredibly. And the problem with having a monster equipped with a whole bunch of equipped cards is that you have to expend resources to get a monster on the field, and it's really hard for them to exist at a surplus in card advantage without giving that card some kind of generic search or draw effect. Whereas if you just have a card summon a token and give you a bunch of other benefits, that kind of solves the problem of creating a generically strong monster to be equipped with a whole bunch of stuff, which can simply just have its effects negated and then flip face down anyway. And even then, the Adventure Token only really uses a single eco spell card, and only because it has an effect that immediately impacts the board as soon as you use it, since it allows you to bounce any card your opponent controls. So even in the Adventure engine, which kind of solved a lot of the problems with equipped spell cards, they still don't use their equipped spell cards to buff their tokens, and almost exclusively just use Dracoback. So how could they fix equipped spell cards to make them better? Well, if we look over at Magic the Gathering, the way they do equip spells is a little bit different than Yu-Gi-Oh! You see, in Magic, equipped spell cards basically exist as cards that you put onto the field, then you pay an additional cost in order to equip them to a monster you control. And while they're equipped to a monster, you can pay its cost in order to equip them to something else. And the most important part, when the monster is equipped to is destroyed or removed from the field in any way, the equipped card simply goes back to the field and is ready to equip to something else as long as you pay its cost again. So there is a detriment to a card being temporarily removed from the field, but it's not the absolute end of the world, as you can just equip it again. So if equipped cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Worked in a similar fashion, where they basically activate like continuous spell cards and then could simply choose to give their benefits to a monster for as long as you wanted, and exist as its own separate entity, this could really go a long way to making them a lot more viable as actual buff sticks. Because if the monster it's equipped to goes to the graveyard, you can simply choose another target on your next turn. Then the only way to get rid of them would be with spell and trap card removal instead of also monster removal. Of course, current equipped spell cards are not inherently balanced to work this way at all, so it would really break the game if they implemented a rule change that made them work like this. But it would get rid of one of their biggest weaknesses of being attached to a monster so absolutely thoroughly. So, why are eco spell cards a failed mechanic? Because they're vulnerable to all forms of destruction in the game, and the ability to simply buff a singular monster is not strong enough in a game that's focused around one card super combos. And additionally, because they are so incredibly vulnerable, Konami is perfectly fine printing very strong effects on them, because their downside is the fact that they are an equip spell card. You know a mechanic is bad when being part of the mechanic is considered a detriment to your effect. Alright, and that's the video. If you have any ideas for failed cards and mechanics that I should cover, please let me know down in the comments below.